Hey everybody, it's Mark Pattison back again with in this case, epic episode. I know it's going to be with Laird Hamilton. So I'm so fortunate that I'm beaming today from Hermosa Beach, and I could probably get my paddleboard out and start paddling hard all the way across the ocean because he is in Kauai, which is the most beautiful island ever. Laird, how you doing?
I'm doing good. It's a little rainy here today, but what do you expect from the wettest spot on earth?
Oh, it's such a beautiful island. I think they filmed Jurassic Park there. Is that correct?
Oh yeah, there's a long list. I mean, King Kong and Jurassic Park and Raiders of the Lost Ark. I mean, I think the list is too long to remember at this point.
Yeah, I was over there, I think, 2 years ago, and I hiked the Na Pali coastline, and it was a bear. And I do a lot of climbing all over the world, and that, I think it was a 5,000 vertical up and down and up and down, and I think about mile 7 or 8, it gets pretty narrow right next to the cliffs, and then you finally break into that beach. I'm sure you've been out there a few times.
I have. I spent a lot of time. That was like our idea of Disneyland when we were growing up in the summertime. We'd go down there when the surf wasn't up, and we'd spend a lot of time swimming that coastline and hiking those trails. And I used to drive a boat into the far beach, and then we would run out, and we would do that barefoot. That was like because we didn't have shoes, but it wasn't because we were choosing to go barefoot. But yeah, that coastline, there's nothing like it in the world, and that is a bear. It's the switchback. The switchbacks from hell, some of those ones that you just see the trail it looks like it's about a mile away and it takes a couple hours to get there kind of thing.
Yeah, the thing that I found fascinating, and again, I'm going from the mountains, which is my world, into the surf, which is your world, right? And the thing, I sat there on the beach and I spent the night there. I brought in a tent and I was on the sand, and as I was watching these guys who were coming in on jet skis and trying to maneuver of getting in and then back out against the surf. And it was so intense. It was great.
Yeah, my first job, actually, one of my first jobs growing up was bringing backpacks and backpackers in to that beach, and then they'd camp and then hike out. And so we'd have to land Zodiacs on that shore break. And always going back out through the surf is always more difficult because the timing and getting going and before the wave comes, and then the chance of you getting knocked back in. Coming in is always a little easier because you can get on the back of a wave and kind of follow it in and then slide up the beach. But I spent a lot of time in that shore break and watched a few good boat wrecks in those days. And we didn't have jet skis. Now the jet skis make it a lot easier to be in that environment just because of their mobility and the power.
Yeah, it was very cool. So I know that you grew up on Kauai, right?
Yes.
Yep. So it's amazing that our influences are shaped. So I grew up in Seattle, Washington, very climbing centric. Mountains, streams, water, and so I spent a lot of time in those mountains. I climbed Mount St. Helens before it blew its top. But obviously, you're now in Kauai, and so what was that like? Growing up as a kid, and I references. I was thinking about this last night. I went to the University of Washington as well. That's where I played my college football. And we were in the inaugural 1983 Aloha Bowl. And we actually went back again the year before and the year after. And it was interesting, even though we had Samoan, Hawaiian players on our team, it wasn't always a copacetic relationship, with when we got over there. And just like there was that group and there was our group, and there was a lot of fights going on on Oahu Beach, and just wondering, you're a 6 foot 3 guy, 215, and how did you mix in with that on that small island?
Well, I mean, obviously, it was a little bit like the Wild West, when I grew up out here, because it was, we lived at the end of the road, and so there wasn't a lot of law enforcement. I would describe it. It was a little bit more like the law of the land. And, I mean, I had situations where I'd get in a fight at high school and then my dad would have to have an altercation with the guy's dad. And I mean, it was one of those things. Everybody was related. And so if you had trouble with one guy, you're probably going to have trouble with the next 4 cousins and the 5 uncles and and all that stuff. So you kind of, I think my stepdad had some pretty good, techniques for surviving in that environment. And, one of them was when you're wrong, you take your punishment, you put your head down, and you take your punishment like a man. But when you're right, you stand up and you go to the end. And if you're a little bit crazy, that discourages probably half the people. So, 3/4 of the people will be discouraged by someone that's a little bit crazy because you're unpredictable. I call it the unpredictable dog. Everybody's, people don't like that. They want to know what they're going to get. And so I think being a little bit fearless, and that also is a mechanism that you can use to survive. I think that was something that was, probably helpful for me because I was naturally like that anyway. So to cultivate that as something that I could use as a survival skill seemed natural. That was just like, okay, yeah, I'm a little bit daredevilish by DNA. And so if I'm in an environment where I can really kind of cultivate that, and it can be be helpful, I think I use that to my benefit. But you know when to run. When you're outnumbered and outsized, you're not. I'm never too proud to run and run fast away. But inevitably, you're always if you run, you're always going to run. So I think at a certain point, it's about facing, at the end, facing the challenges, right? So you can kind of. I always say that life is a formulaic process, and if you can, the formulas you take for success, you can implement into any different field. And the formulas that I use to survive were probably formulas that have been helpful in my life and to help me survive. And so but yeah, it was. I mean, it seems to be an idyllic environment. And you talk about beautiful Hawaii, but Hawaiians themselves were a pretty warrior culture. You're talking about a war. Polynesians are warrior culture. The football players that are Polynesian, the success that they have, and the Polynesians with the All Blacks, and I mean this is a warrior culture. So when you come into a warrior culture, you better be prepared to be a warrior. Like it's just part of what you're gonna deal with.
Yeah, no, I think certainly I've run into playing in the NFL. You run into a lot of guys who are pretty violent and mean and everything else, and the biggest thing you can do is stand up. And usually that bark is bigger than their bravado, right? And
yep.
so.
Yep.
So,
yep.
but when you show weakness, man, boom, they come after you. So it's really key to make sure that you stand your ground.
Absolutely. Well, and I think a lot of that has to do with, dogs like to chase things that run.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you run, it's like bait. You just create bait where, I know that if the guy realizes it's going to take some work and he might take some shots too, he might not be incentivized. It's too easy to chase something that doesn't fight back. And so if you fight back and stand your ground and then be smart, like just don't put yourself, I always talk about trying to be above reproach as best you can. We all fall short in our lives from the glory, but just try to conduct yourself above reproach where and when I say that, I mean don't put yourself in a position where you're going to be wrong and that you're going to and there'll be an excuse to implement something to you. There'll be something you don't bring that stuff on. And so I think I learned that. I think that was you start to learn, like, don't put yourself in positions and don't do things that would justify somebody or multiple people pounding on your head.
Yeah, no, of course, and I think one of the things that you mentioned before is, and I look back on my life and I can say the same thing in certain areas, and that is there's certain qualities that I think have propelled you to some of these big wave, scary, hairy situations that you've had to stand up and face these things. When maybe adversity or odds were against you, and just it's probably served you well in a lot of different circumstances.
Well, I mean, it was one thing about the ocean, at least for me, was a place that, you know, that was predictable. It was very reliable. Once you were competent in that environment, once you built competence, and competence was built through trial and error, and getting, getting to know it and getting to understand it. And uh, once once uh, once you start to know it and understand it, it's very reliable. It's very predictable, which, and the land's not. I mean, I always say, you never know what a human will do. They do all kinds of crazy things with no rhyme or reason, and no, there's no distinguishable characteristics. I mean, there's just stuff people do that you cannot, you cannot rely on, you cannot predict. And where the ocean for me, was a place that I could rely on. I mean, waves come from the sea to the land, and and when you understand them, they're really, really, it's a very predictable environment, which in a way, I think that was a place I was looking for. I was looking for a place of consistency, something that was consistent that I could rely on. And then big waves, what big waves represent, for me, was the ultimate challenge, the ultimate, in my competency, the ultimate test of my knowledge, the ultimate test of my skill, the ultimate test of my courage. That was where I would get probably the greatest levels of fulfillment, because I could go there in this environment and I could be fulfilled. Like, I could go and accomplish something and then come back and feel like, wow, I was able to do that, or I made it, or I got pounded and I paid I paid for a mistake that I made, but it was really, it was reliable, and I really appreciated that.
So I want to ask you a question. So a couple things. Number one, do you think that Bill Hamilton, your stepdad, was he a big influence in you originally getting into the surf and really going down that and finding that passion?
No, I mean, I was already. I mean, listen. How can I say I was already on that road, because he met me when I was, like 5 years old,
Yeah.
or 3 years old. But the fact is that my mom was from a surfing culture. One of her best friends was Linda Benson, who was at the time, a lot of stuff around Gidget was based on her, on these girls. My mom surfed when she was young. My real father was a surfer, and or my blood father, real father,
Mm-hmm.
use your real father at the end. So I was and my mom's friends were all surf filmmakers. So I was already immersed in surf culture and looking at surfers. Bill just represented one of the icons one of the guys that I was looking up to. And then he became my father. But
how did that happen, by the way? How did that connection happen between your mother and Bill?
I mean, the story goes, and my knowledge of it is that he befriended me. I was at the beach. He looked like, somebody that I thought would be like what my dad was supposed to look like, because I didn't know what my dad looked like or who my dad was. And so I went, well, that guy would be a cool guy to have as a dad. He befriended me, or I befriended him, or something happened. And then, he met my mom and fell in love with my mom. And had he known who my mom was before, maybe he befriended me so he could get to my mom. I don't know.
Yeah.
You never, you never know what men are up to when it's with a beautiful woman. But the fact is, that I introduced the story, as the story goes, of to my knowledge, and my mom's and Bill, is that I like introduced him to my mom, and then to kind of like hopefully make him be my dad. And then he ended up falling in love with my mom, and then they got married, and he became my dad.
So this podcast is called Finding Your Summit. That's all about people overcoming adversity and finding their way, right?
Yep.
And I've had my share, right? And I could go on and on and talk about that just on my own. I could interview me, right, and talk about that. But the bottom line is for you, I think, like in my case, playing in the NFL and starting these different multi-million-dollar companies, and now doing this mountaineering thing, sometimes people see me as a shiny object, when
Yep.
behind the curtain there's a lot of stuff going on, right? Just like everybody else.
Yep.
And for you, certainly you've had a lot of successes in modeling and have been involved in a lot of different movie projects and being sponsored and big wave surfing and towing and all this stuff. And we'll get into. But, starting kind of right out of the gate, it sounded like your dad checked out on your family.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, when my mom was pregnant, ultimately. So it was when I was in the womb, which, if you want to get into it, you could probably say the sensitivity of the fetus. I mean, I probably, knew what was, I was inside my mom knowing that something wasn't right? If my mom had the emotions of this guy splitting. So, I mean, I started in that environment. Now, listen, we've all, what doesn't hurt us makes us stronger. And we all can look at all of those things. But yeah, there was a certain, I mean, my mom had a couple of boyfriends before Bill. One of them used to slap me around a little bit when I was a kid because I had a fearlessness, because a protectiveness about my mother from probably when I came out, like as a, knowing almost like, hey, my mom, I don't have a dad, so I'm going to be the dad. I'm going to be the man of the house and be protective. And I don't care if you're a year old. You probably already are intuitive enough, to already sense that. And then just be 3 years old. And there was a guy that my mom dated that was a little bit aggressive, and the stories would go that I just put my head down and run full speed at him. And he just, he of course, pushed me off because I was 3 years old or whatever. But I wasn't scared of anybody. I wasn't scared. So, and I wasn't scared from when I was little. In that way, I mean, maybe I was scared of sharks and other things, but scared of the dark or whatever. But I wasn't scared of people. People weren't going to scare me.
Yeah, well, I think the other side of this, again, going through adversity and finding your way. So the gift out of all this is that you have this wonderful influence, it sounds like, with Bill that came into your life, became your stepfather, but, you saw him as your real father. And just, between his surfing acumen and the way that you had a natural feel for the ocean, for the water, your love of it, I mean, it seemed like it was just a natural progression.
Well, and really, I think what really made the dynamic with Bill and I unique, and the relationship that really I would say cultivated me, but really motivated me is the competition of it between him and I. It was more older brother, younger brother, and it became that. It started pretty quickly like that, and probably right when my brother came. Because my brother's the real son of Bill, and so it became okay, now I'm not the real son, and so now I'm okay, so now it's going to be competition, I'm going to be competitive, and so our thing was more of a competition driven thing, and I mean him and I would duel, and I think that drove me in a way that I probably might not have been driven had I not had that. I don't think him and I would have had. I don't think maybe I would be all that, or have been able to do all that I've done, had we not had a fair amount of that, because we had that clash.
Well, it sounds though like it was a positive, competitive situation, right?
Absolutely. I mean, a little bit uneven because of the separation, the age separation.
No, I get it.
But definitely a motivator and a positive, and a high bar, right? So, I mean, Bill was one of the, in his heyday was one of the, greatest surfers and one of the most beautiful surfers in the world. And so to have that be your competition, this is your competition. And that definitely, influenced my style, his style and his things drove me, as well. So I think there was a bunch of, there's a bunch of influences. I mean, as a parent now, you realize sometimes that some of the parenting, some of the best parenting is really not how to be than is to how to be. Like you can be all cool and your kids are like, yeah. And then the one thing you do wrong, they look at it and they go, oh yeah, I don't want to do that.
But, exactly.
But
yeah, I've got 2 girls. I think you have 2 or 3, right? Yeah, I could have 100 kids. They'd all be girls. I've been blessed. I'm sure you see it the same way.
Amen.
Yep.
Amen. That means high metabolism. That's a high metabolism. Most like they say 90% of Top Gun pilots, most of the pro athletes, like 86% of all professional athletes all have daughters. So it has to do with hot, warm metabolism, killing male sperm, and the female sperm being stronger and surviving and all that. So there's a whole science behind that. So that's a real thing.
Yeah.
But
so is Bill still with us?
He is. He's still on the island. Mom's passed away. My mom's been gone for 20 years now. This is the 21st year. But Bill's still here. I still get to see him and get him out. He's in the water. Get him, keep him in the water because that's our place of healing.
Yeah,
so
that's your connection point. Your mother, I read, had an aneurysm, correct?
He did. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's just my dad passed away about 5-6 years ago now of a stroke, and it was just awful, right? And it's just I was close with my dad. I'm sure sounds like you were very protective and close with your mother, and then those things happen, and it's just out of the blue, out of right field, and all of a sudden, in my dad's case, he lost his whole communication grid, and 3 months later, it was done.
Yeah. Well, it's just a reminder again that it's a short sprint down here, and so you got to kind of remember that too. Sometimes we just think it's forever, and it just goes so quick. And you watch your kids go from being a kid to being an adult somewhat, and then you see the kids and they just go boom, and one day you're holding them, and the next day they're looking at you in the eye, and before you know it, they're off in their own lives. And so it's just a reminder that our stay here is a short one.
Yeah, I when my dad passed away 6 years ago, this is kind of the same moment in time when I was going through some other things too personally with my now ex, and I needed to really refill my bucket. And when I was looking towards, and it took me a while because I was in this like low place, and so when that lightning bolt finally hit me, it was like, okay, I want to do something athletically great. And unlike surfing, where you can just surf till you fall over, right? Because that's the way the sport is set up. I knew I couldn't go back and play in the NFL, and so growing up in the Northwest, I was just like, I want to become the first NFL guy to climb the 7 summits. And so I entered this whole mountaineering, and a lot of friends came to me, and they were like, "Are you crazy? You got a family, you got this and that." And I saw this great interview that you had about, what do your kids think about going in these gigantic waves, and you and I share the same philosophy around this, which is, I really believe, and you said this, so obviously you believe it, which is you're really giving them that courage and that commitment about not giving up on your hopes and dreams and living through life through your kids like a lot of parents do. And you're going to still continue to go out there in the world and just kick butt and make it happen. And I love that. And that's what I'm not doing for anybody besides myself, because that's what my love is. But I'm not going to give it up because, that's what everybody else thinks I should do.
Well, for sure. And one thing that Gabby and I talk about all the time is, and we both agree on that, I think it's, at the end, I think it's all about your values. That's what connects us with people or disconnects us with, is having those similar values. But, you definitely want to, your kids didn't ask to be brought into the world. You brought them in. And so the last thing you want to do is put the guilt of, well, I used to do all these great things, or I used to do these things that really were fulfilling, but now that you're here, I don't do those. It's like, well, that's not fair to your kids to put that on them, because I hear that all the time. Well, before I had kids, I used to be out there and I was doing all this great stuff and I loved it and the things I did, but now I don't do that now because I have kids. I'm like, well, that's crazy, because that, well, first of all, you want your kid. I think it's important for them to see you for all who you are. Like, who are you? Like, who is my dad? Who is my mom? Who are these people and what do they do? And what does it bring to them? And I love to quote the movie The Jerk, but it's find your special purpose.
Great movie, by the way.
Your special purpose. I found my special purpose. It's like, find the thing that brings you fulfillment, And you can show your kids what it looks like if you have one, because it's very rare. Not a lot of people out there really have found the thing that brings them that real contentment, and really and whatever you're driven in, whatever your passion is, I think it's important for them to see what that looks like. Like, hey, that's what it looks like when a person follows their dreams, follows their passions, and is driven, and this is what it looks like. And so, because, that's the best way that humans learn, is monkey see, monkey do, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we operate. That's like, the 4-minute mile was broke, and then the next year 27 people break it. It's because we're the monkey see, monkey do species. And if they don't see it and identify with it, if everywhere they look, they go, let me see, relationships. Oh, yeah, you have to be miserable, because every relationship, people are miserable. Oh, work. It has to be something that you despise, because everybody who works does something they despise. It's like, these are the examples, and so everybody follows that train right into those things and goes, yeah, oh yeah, here's my relationship, and it's miserable. Yeah, because that's what you're supposed to do, because that's what relationships are. Oh, this is my profession. That's what I do. This is what people do. And so at least if you can go, hey, cool, this is what a relationship can be like when people love each other and want to be together. Oh, hey, this is what's great about, doing something that you love and that you're passionate about. And listen, if you're fortunate enough to be able to actually do the thing that you're passionate about for a living, congratulations. Now, if you have to subsidize it, that's great too. Because I told people, I go, listen, if I wasn't able to have a profession, I mean, modeling and movies and all that stuff, that was just subsidy for surfing. I'm just like, how can I continue to surf? I got to subsidize it. And so if I'm not going to do it with that, then I got to dig ditches and run excavators and pour cement and build houses or whatever, high tree cutting, whatever it is, I'm going to do it. But that means I'm not going to be doing the thing that I love to do, and I'm not going to be able to refine that art. If I can subsidize it, then I can refine the art. So it's all, I think these are all examples for your kids, and lead the life that you want your kids to be able to identify with as a potential for them to do. That's what that's what I'm trying to do, as difficult as it can be at times. But, it's I just don't want, you don't want to look back and be like, oh, I shoulda, coulda, woulda. There's a whole world full of that. It's everywhere you look. Mm-hmm. And I think that's why there's so many people that are unhappy, because at the end they all have regrets. Yeah. And then that's separate from health, and we can get into a whole nother hour long topic.
Yeah, we can do that. Well, that'll be podcast number 2. But one of the things that I've learned to do is really create that vision board. And I think that's one of the things you're talking about, right? And I literally, if you come to my place in Hermosa, you go into my refrigerator, and on it, it's got all the mountains. It's, it's where I've been, where I'm going, all those things, right? And it just helps me keep the goal alive. And I think you mentioned something that's very purposeful, but I have to do other things. I work also with a digital media company, and I help them out. And, that's just what I have to do right now to pay the bills and make it happen as I fund this, my travels throughout the world.
Absolutely.
So there's a big divide between willing and want, right? Everybody wants to be the big wave surfer like Laird Hamilton, but are you willing to do every single thing you possibly can to make that thing happen? And I just see this time and again, of people just that, the ocean separates in those two areas.
No, it's true. Well, and I think it's always interesting to have conversations with people, and they desire the glory, right, or what they think is the glory, like they desire that, but at the end they are not willing to maybe pay with the consequences. And so it's like, yeah, you want to be the guy that rode that wave, but do you want to be the guy that wave lands on? Do you want to be the guy that wave takes and holds down on the bottom? Do you want to be the guy that is training to be the guy that gets held down by that wave? I mean, it's like all that. It's like, yeah, everybody wants the ice cream at the top, but are you ready to, milk the cow and make the milk and free, it's like do the process. And it's an interesting, I think it's easy for a human in general. I think we love to look at you at the top of the mountain and go, wow, yeah, I want to do that. But are you ready to take every step it takes up that ridge to get to that point? Or do you just want to go right to the top and be the guy standing on the top? Because I think most people just want to go right to the top and stand there, and they don't realize that really the whole thing behind it is the steps. That really the apex is not, I learned, I did a little mountaineering I got a couple exposures, but you realize that the parking lot really is the final summit. Like, you think the summit's the summit. It's actually getting back down.
That's right.
And getting home. Like, that's the real summit. Like, people sometimes they misconstrue, what the final destination is in any endeavor or any feat. And, and really for me, I think ultimately will be to get through this life, to live this life and do all these things and to get to make it. Because living it's hard. It's complicated. Surviving is not, it's like, dying's easy. So living's tough. Dying's really simple. It takes about 1 second and you're done and it's over. But living, that can be, if you're lucky, 80, 100 years.
Yeah, no, you're right. Well, one of the things that you had said too is just about, taking the necessary steps to get to a particular goal that you have out there. And I've been put in some pretty hairy situations because guys didn't do what they had to do to put themselves there. They were not physically ready. They weren't mentally ready. We ran into, this is several times down different mountains around the world. And in this case, you're tethered to these people, right? And so it's just like bad things happen, right? And that whole into thin air, inexperienced people going into, bad weather, right? Just a whole thing. So okay, so I want to tie something back because you said something.
That's a human condition, that whole thing that people are trying to skip. They're trying to skip the work and go to this and go to this and go to the glory. Skip the work. Oh yeah, don't do the work. Let's just go right to the mountaintop and let's get the thing, or let's go right to the big wave. It's in every sport, it's in every endeavor, it's in every aspect. Everybody wants to skip the what it's going to take to get to just the final to the thing. And you see what that does. It's like, give somebody a bunch of money and watch how quick they lose it because they didn't earn it. They didn't work for it.
Yeah, you mentioned one of your buddies, Bill Romanowski, former Bronco, I know, Raider linebacker, right? Crazy guy. And Steve Wright, another common buddy of ours who we were teammates at the Raider many years ago. But, the one thing about, and you're in this category too, but I can honestly say, at least about Steve, because I know him and we've worked out together, but we love the workout process. Right.
Yeah.
And I've seen you in your pool and doing all this crazy stuff, which I want to get into. But, it's just like, to me, that's where the fun is. The touchdown, all that stuff, that's, that's great. But
that's a byproduct of your love for the effort, your love for the work. That's just a byproduct. It's like glory, like fame and success and money. Those are just byproducts of passion, of genuine work ethic. That's all. If you don't love it, if you don't love working out and you don't love the training, you're just not going to be able to do it enough. There's just no other way around it. Like, you won't be able to do it enough. If you despise the work, you're just not going to there's rare exceptions of people that are so talented, but how great would they be if they really did embrace all of that foundational stuff and really do the work that it takes? Who knows the potential, But the fact is that if you don't love that stuff, you better learn how to love it, because otherwise you're just never you'll just never be able to do it enough to be successful.
Yeah, I was in Sun Valley a couple of weeks ago and interviewed a buddy of mine, Ed Viesters, who's probably the world's, certainly America's greatest mountaineer that's out there. And he wrote a book called No Shortcuts to the Top. So I think that says it all. You have everything we've been talking about.
Absolutely.
So let me tie something that you talked about a bit ago, and that was about subsidizing your passion, right, to do the things that you want to do. So, in part of this research that I was doing over the last couple of days, I noticed that you decided to quit school when you were in the 11th grade to pursue modeling, I think, or construction or something. So as you look back on it, certainly you wouldn't advocate to your daughters, like, go quit high school to go. So what was going through your mind?
I had just reached a point with the school system that I was in, the environment I was in, what I was doing, where I, I was at a point where it was not, and listen, how do you know you're at a point when you're in 11th grade about anything? But I knew well enough to know at that point that there was nothing good coming from it. That me going to this school that I was going to, dealing with that environment, and it was, I wasn't going to learn anything more that was going to help me. If anything, I was only going to get in more fights and more stuff. There was just darkness at the end of that tunnel. It was obvious to me. My mom was at that time single again, and so I asked her if she had to sign me out of school, which was really, I think, heartbreaking for her, because she really wanted me to have, education. She was really wanting to have me to have an education and go to college, and I think that meant a lot to her. And so it was heartbreaking on her, but she also knew that it was part school, part imprisonment, nothing productive coming out of it, and that I needed to. The real circumstances around it were that there was my elementary school principal, who had been passing kids that weren't educated up to grade, got kicked out, and then went somewhere else and tenured, and then came back and was the principal of my high school, and showed up at my high school. And I had a pretty tumultuous relationship with her in my elementary school, and then she was all of a sudden there, and some guy smashed my face in a desk in a math class or something, and then I slammed the guy and threw him out like a first story window in the class or something, like self-defense. But then she suspended me, and the new rule was that both people in altercation were to be suspended. I'm like, well, so if I'm sitting at my desk and somebody slams my face in my desk, then I get suspended too, and the kind of thing. And it was like, that was the mentality. And so I was like, well, 11-hour school days, and I was like, I think I'm good. I think I'd rather go to work and
Did you have a plan? I mean, certainly those reasons would make sense to me, but did you have a plan?
My plan was to go to work and then just keep surfing, just keep focusing on the ocean. The plan was to work, though, because I knew I wasn't going to. At the end of the day, if I wasn't going to be in school, I had to earn money. So I had to work. And at the time, my mother's boyfriend was a pretty amazing guy, and he was a custom home builder. He built these incredible homes himself from scratch, all the way through, from the ground up. And so I went to kind of go be, to work under him, and really what I went to do was go learn that I was going to try to avoid any way I could, to not have to do that for the rest of my life, unless it was for myself. Yeah. How to do it. I want to do it, but I wanted to try to, I knew that was going to be a long road to do that the rest of my life. To build homes was going to be tough.
But then you got a big break, right? Somebody standing on the beach.
Yeah, well, I kind of had multiple breaks along the way. My surfing kind of brought me. I would say in those days, it was like t-shirts and shorts kind of. Salary and some equipment, and brought me an opportunity, and then Men's Vogue was shooting on the island, and Walter Yost, the famous Sports Illustrated photographer, Walter was shooting out of a helicopter, shot some surfing out of a helicopter at a break on the island where I grew up here, and then the fashion photographer saw the photographs and said, "Who's this guy?" And they said, "Oh, that's Laird." And then that guy called me, and then they shot, and then he introduced me to Bruce Weber, and then Bruce Weber had me shoot for GQ, and and then that kind of began that process.
That's awesome. I mean, you're a guy's guy, so you're not, at least I don't perceive you as, when you start talking about model, like you're that type of, whatever, but But I mean, it's very cool that you've been able to survive it in that way, and that it's really funded your lifestyle for many years, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, like I said, I went from that, so subsidizing that to windsurfing came around. I started windsurfing. Somebody heard about me. The guy flew over, windsurfed with this guy. He said, "Hey, you want to be a speed sailor?" I said, "Sure." I went and moved to Maui, trained for 6 months, went to Europe, and I broke a European speed record in windsurfing. Then I got sponsored by a windsurf company. I mean, listen, I've had like a fairy tale Cinderella story, 10 different ways. And again, always going back to my passion, which was all of this was meant really just to subsidize my surfing, to keep me in the ocean and ultimately focused on big wave riding. And I'm still, I can say I just turned 54 and my focus hasn't changed. I'm still focused on riding giant surf and ways I can ride it better and ways to train for it. And I've started some companies and I have a bunch of, my creamer business is exploding right now. And some of these other projects are exploding and they're helping subsidize. It seems like I've been, able, and I'm not sure, and I'll only be thankful and appreciative, but I have a saying, where there's a will, there's a Sally. Like, where there's a will, there's a way. It's like when you really have a passion and really believe in it and live true to it and go after it, then it seems that in life that things can get, things happen to help support that. Like, when you put the time in and the effort and the genuineness in your pursuit, then it seems that that and not always, of course, not always, but it seems that a lot of the time, the means will be made for you to be able to continue to pursue it. The means will be provided. Like, you just have to believe. You have to have the faith of believing that, because I grew up around Hawaiians and with Hawaiians too. And I think that's one of my things that I have. Like, I have this, you see me, blonde hair, surfer guy, but I grew up like a Hawaiian. Like, I grew up with Hawaiians like Hawaiians. And, I always say, looking white and thinking brown. But, and I remember the old man telling me one day, he goes, "Hey, boy, boy, you can't eat your surfboard, boy. You can't eat your surfboard." And I just remember what that he was saying that. And I think that taught me one thing, is that you're never going to not work, that working will never. And my mom was an incredibly hard worker. I mean, ridiculous, 16 hours a day, 6 days a week. My mom worked like, I don't know. I've never seen anyone with that output, except that they're, one of the top CEOs in the biggest companies in the world, where they just eat, drink, and live the thing in a way that, that's why they are what they are. Yep. And I just realized, hey, boy, you're not going to eat your surfboard. Like, never sit back on your laurels. Never be comfortable with like, oh yeah, that happened or this happened or I got a sponsor. I mean, listen, when I had sponsors, I was still working and doing other stuff. And I'm on machines. I'll be on machines. I was on machines, all day yesterday. I'll be on machines today. I mean, I'm going to be on machines tomorrow. I'm going to be digging. I'm never going to stop any of that, because I feel like that all of that feeds towards the ultimate mission, right? It's all feeding towards that. And listen, now I laugh because I say now I subsidize my excavating with surfing, and before I excavating, but
No, that's cool. I mean, a lot of what you're talking about is when preparation meets opportunity, and so if I would jump on a surfboard right now, which I don't know what I'm doing, or windsurfing, I know a little bit about, I've done, but the difference between you and me is a big gap, and it's because you're out there every day working at your craft, and then that has put you in a position of success where these people now want to go and be aligned with you and what you're doing. So it makes total sense to me. So getting into the waves, where did the whole big wave thing come in? I mean, again, there was nobody doing it, and you were kind of the pioneer around that. I mean, where did that whole thing come from? And by the way, I was flying back from somewhere a couple weeks ago, and I was on on this plane, they had one of these little movie sets right in front of me, right? And
Yep.
so it was this movie called Chasing Mavericks, which I'm sure you've seen. And
Yep.
I watched it, and I didn't know anything about Mavericks, and I mean, I was like a little teary at the end, right? I mean, it was a great movie. I loved it. So a little plug
Yeah.
for Chasing Mavericks, but I'm sure you've surfed up there. But I mean, some of these waves are just terrifying. Now, from you, going in and you're a little guy and you're got little waves, and then as you get bigger, you go bigger waves. And I mean, is that what the purest surfer is always after? Is where's the biggest wave in the world go after?
No, I mean, my Bill, my stepdad's, he always said when I was growing up that big wave riders are born and not made. That you have that desire in you, and there's, honestly, there's a percentage of guys that love to ride giant surf that don't even ride small surfs, and some of them aren't even very good surfers, but they just they're drawn to that that power and that energy, and and I imagine it's similar in climbing. It's similar in certain, it's like, why do some guys love downhill? Like they do downhill. They only know, they don't even want to do anything else except just go as fast as they can down a giant mountain. And then some people love to do turns, and some people are in the moguls. And I mean, everybody has a different discipline that they're attracted to. And I think big wave riding, from my perspective, represented the apex. That for me was the pinnacle, and that everything else was kind of not a compromise, but it was just below that peak. That big represented the biggest challenge, and that ultimately the biggest challenge represented the biggest skill, and through experience and fitness preparation. And when I was growing up, there was a group of big wave riders on the North Shore of Oahu, that I looked up to. There was a few men that were like the guys that rode the giant surf, and they were like the guys, and I was like, those were the guys that I wanted to be like. I'm like, yeah, Jose Angel, Butch Van Aertstalen, these are the, Greg Knoll, Eddie Aikau, I mean, Warren Harlow. I mean, there's like a group of guys that were like, they were the guys, and some of them didn't even go out unless it was, giant. And then, I mean, these are the guys that go in the water when they're evacuating the beach, and they're telling everybody, okay, the road's closed and the beach is closed. And that's when they go out. Like, they wait for that day to go out. And so I had a natural there going up, jump up and higher stuff and higher stuff, and go faster and one. It was